Hi all, in this class we will be learning about Engel curve. Okay, so we will be having the discussion about the Engel curve as well as the previous equations based on Engel curve. So Engel curve or Engel's law is an economic theory introduced in 1857 by Ernest Engel, a German statistician, stating that the percentage of income allocated for food purchases decreases as income rises. And as a household's income increases, the percentage of income spent on food decreases while the percentage or the proportion spent on other goods such as luxury goods increases. So this is the law or the Engel's law. So what the theory states or the Engel's law states is, when income of a person increases, the percentage of income that person spent on the food products decreases. Okay, so that states that's inverse relationship between the increased income and the food consumption. When the income is increased, the income spent on the food or the consumption of the food decreases. Okay, and on the other side, the same time when there is increased income, even though the consumption of the food item is reduced, there will be increased consumption of the other goods such as luxury goods. Okay, so that is the Engel's law. Okay, the positive relationship between the income and the consumption of the luxury goods, but negative relationship between the income and the consumption of the food products. The proportion of the or the percentage of the income allocated of the food purchases decreases as income rises. So now let us see the conclusions the Engel's law of consumption is having. So the first point is, as income is increasing, the percentage expenditure on necessaries in the sense food of life decreases and vice versa. So that is the first conclusion what we can understand from the Engel's law. When the income is increasing, the income spent on the necessaries of life. So for example, food is a necessary of life. So when the income increase and if your income spent on the necessaries of life is decreasing, so that is being explained through the Engel's law. Okay, and otherwise the vice versa also. That means when income decreases, the percentage of the income spent on the food items or the necessaries increases. Okay, so two ways we can state. One, when the income of a person increases, the percentage spent on the food items decrease. Otherwise, when the income of a person falls, the percentage spent on the food item increases. The other conclusion that can be drawn from the Engel's law of consumption is, percentage expenditure on luxuries and other cultural, recreational wants, education, health, etc. are increased with increase in income and decrease with income decreases. So we told in Engel's curve is stating that percentage allotted for the food products decreases with the income increase, but percentage allocated for the percentage of the income allotted for the luxury goods or the other goods such as recreation wants, the education, health, etc. increases with increase in income. So there is a positive relationship between the increased income and the proportion spent on the luxury goods or the recreation facilities or the education or health in the case of Engel's law. So this is another conclusion that can be drawn from Engel's law. And another point, another conclusion is, when it comes to the housing or rent, the lodging, otherwise housing or rent, fuel and light, the percentage expenditure is generally same for all income. So the expenditure on these areas remains same or constant. Which all are the areas the spending does not change with the change in income? One is the expenditure on the lodging, the other one is the expenditure on the rent or the fuel and light, all these things. So any sort of expenditure on the fuel and light or any sort of expenditure on the rent or lodging or housing, these does not change with change in the level of income. So these expenditure remain same for all incomes. And the last conclusion is, whatever the income, percentage outlay on clothing is practically the same. So other than the housing, rent, light, fuel, etc., the expenditure on the clothing also remains same as per the Engel's law. So as per the general conclusion is, when the income increases, the expenditure on the food or the necessaries of life decreases. And the second point, when the income increases, the consumption of the luxury goods or the education, health, recreation facilities, etc. increases. Other point, whatever the level of income, the consumption of the fuel, light, the housing, rent, or the cloth, all these remains the same. Okay, the income consumption of these areas remains the same. These are the conclusion that can be drawn from the Engel's law. So now this is a question, the model question. The Engel's curve for a given good is. So we have 4 options: positive, negative, horizontal and vertical. So this is a question based on the slope of the Engel curve for a given good. So we have learned what is the Engel curve is explaining, and now we have to see what is the slope of Engel curve when it is a given good. So here the Engel curve will be positively sloped for the normal goods, but negatively sloped for the inferior and given goods. So we got the answer will be negatively sloped, because the Engel curve for a given good is negatively sloped, and it is because that when the income of a person increases, the consumption of the good decreases. Okay, so in which case? In case of the inferior good as well as the given good. Okay, in both the cases of the given good and the inferior good, the income effect is negative. In both the cases, when in the given goods case, when price increases, quantity demanded increases. That means when price increases, income falls and quantity demanded increases. So because of that reason, the given good is having a negatively sloped Engel curve. So Engel curve is basically explaining the proportion of the change in the percentage or the proportion of the income on consumption of a particular good. So it varies from for different category of good. So when it comes to the normal goods, when income increases, the proportion of the consumption of that good increases, and because of that reason, the normal good will be having a positively sloping Engel curve. But when it comes to the inferior good and the given good of the Engel curve, in such cases, when the income increases, the quantity demanded falls. Okay, so because of the negative income effect with respect to the given good and the inferior good, the Engel curve is having a negatively sloped curve for the inferior goods as well as the given good, because at this point, see here, this is the normal good. When income is increasing, the quantity demanded is also increasing. So y axis we are having income and the x axis we are having quantity demanded. This level of income, this much quantity demanded. When income increases, quantity demanded increased. Again when the income increases, quantity demanded increased. So positively sloping curve. But when it comes to the inferior goods or given goods, so this figure shows a combination of normal goods and the inferior goods. So here till this point, the good is, this is a case of normal good. When here you will see, when the income is increasing, y axis is denoting the income and x axis is denoting the good rice. So here when the income is increasing, the consumption of rice is increasing to more and more. Therefore, the rice being a normal good, income increases, consumption of the rice increases, therefore it is a normal good and positively sloping. But when it is an inferior good, you see, it's inferior good means, when a good is an inferior good means, at that time the Engel curve will be having a backward bending. Okay, so Engel curve will have a backward bend when the good is an inferior good or when a good becomes an inferior good. So what happens? So after when the good is becoming inferior with the increased income, so here again the income is increasing. If you see the curve, we can understand that the income level is again increasing. But what happened? The quantity demanded is reducing with the increased income. Okay, so because for an inferior good, the increased income is leading to reduce the quantum of good consumed. Okay, and that is why at that time the good is called as inferior good, and inferior goods are having a negatively sloped Engel curve. Okay, so always we know that when inferior goods are considered, they are narrowly defined goods and they are having large number of substitutes available. When the large number of substitutes are available, when the income is increasing, consumer has an option to find a better quality good and reduce the consumption of the initial good. So here suppose take rice into consideration. When the income is increasing beyond a particular level, the consumer is able to afford another good other than the rice. The consumer is able to find another substitute good. So they can have a better quality product other than the rice. So at that time what happened? The consumption of the rice will decrease. So when a good is becoming inferior, when the income increases, the consumer will be substituting rice for the another rice with another good, and at that time the consumption of the rice will fall. Because of that reason, inferior good is having a negatively sloped Engel curve. Okay. So see once again, the Engel curve is related to the quantity of good to the income here. So here this is income and this is the quantity of the goods consumed. So this by seeing this Engel curve, we can find that this Engel curve is a positively sloping Engel curve, which means it is an Engel curve of normal good. So when the Engel curve is positively sloped, that means that Engel curve is a Engel curve for normal good. When the income increases, the consumption also increases. So see this one, so this is a combination of the normal and the inferior good. So here we have the income in the y-axis and hamburger in the x-axis, and see in the initial case when the income was 10, the consumption was 4. So again the income is increased along with the increased income, the consumption of the hamburger was also increasing. So see at this 20 level of income, the consumption of hamburger was approximately 12. Okay. So when income increases, the consumption was increasing. So after a particular point with the increased income, okay, when the income was increasing, what happened? The consumption of the hamburger was decreasing. So at this stage, the hamburger is a inferior good. Okay, so at this stage, hamburger is an inferior good. That is why it is having a negatively sloped Engel curve. And here, the increased income, the consumption of the hamburger is falling. And here, the hamburger is becoming an inferior good. So see, Engel curves are backward bending for inferior goods. So till this point, Engel curve is for the normal good, and at this point when the Engel curve is becoming backward bending, so Engel curves are backward bending for the inferior goods. So this is the case of inferior goods and this is the case of normal goods. In normal goods it is positively sloped, and inferior goods it is negatively sloped. Income consumption curves can be used to construct Engel curves, and which relate the quantity of the good consumed to income. So income consumption, what is being used to construct an Engel curve? Income consumption curves are being used. So the consumption with respect to the income is being plotted in order to depict an Engel curve. So why? Because it is related to the quantity of good consumption to income. So increased income lead to increased consumption of good means normal Engel curve of normal good can be seen. But reduced consumption with increased income means if that is being plotted on the Engel curve, that will be the Engel curve for the inferior goods. So that is being plotted here. So that is here the figure 4.16. So this here we can see the positively sloped normal good and the negatively sloped inferior good. Okay. So figure 4.16 shows how Engel curves can be constructed for two different goods, and figure 4.16 of A shows an upward sloping Engel curve. See, so here we are having the figure 4.16A, that is the upward sloping Engel curve, and here the other figure we are having a combination of both the inferior and the normal good. So in both the figures, as income increases, the consumption of the X also increases, and the upward sloping Engel curve applies to all normal goods. And in figure 4.16b shows the Engel curve for rice. We see that rice consumption increases initially as income increases. So we have seen that the consumption of rice was increasing with the increase in the consumption of the income. So rice consumption was increasing with the increased income, the consumption of rice was also increased. That is being shown. So that is it, and we see the rice consumption increases with the increase initially as income increases. As income increases further, consumption falls, and the proportion of the Engel curve that is downward sloping is the income range in which rice is an inferior good. So here after a particular point, okay, till this point when the income increases, the consumption of rice was increasing. But after this point, okay, with a further increase in the income, the consumption of rice was falling. That means at this point, the consumer is in a position of higher income and they are able to substitute. They are available with a large number of substitutes for the rice. Okay, their consumer is in a position of higher income. Okay, and he can easily substitute some other good with rice. And at that time what happened? The quantity demanded of the rice will fall, and from that point rice is becoming an inferior good. So at this point rice is an inferior good, and at this point rice is a normal good. Okay, it's clear? So here the substitutes are, so when it is becoming an inferior good, that means more substitutes are available, and that means in this point the substitution effect will be greater than the income effect. And when it comes to the normal goods case, the income effect is positive and income effect will be the greater than the substitution effect. So that is it. So that is here in this point the rice is becoming an inferior good. So as income increases further, consumption is falling for the rise, and the portion of the Engel curve that is downward sloping is the income range in which rise is an inferior good. We have seen it as the figure. Now let us move to the case of a neutral commodity. So when a neutral commodity is quite unresponsive to the increase in income, so whatever the increase in income or decrease in income, when it's a neutral commodity, it won't change. So we have mentioned some of the examples when it comes to the clothing, or when it comes to the housing, when it comes to the lodging or the fuel and light, all these things, the consumption of the commodity does not change with respect to the income. The consumption remains same even after the income changes. So in such cases, we can say that such kinds of commodities are neutral commodities, and Engel curve for neutral commodities will be vertical to the x-axis. See, the income is increasing, but the level of consumption is not changing. The commodity, the level of clothing, the consumption of clothing, level of consumption of housing, all these still remains the same. So such kinds of commodities are basically having a vertical Engel curve. Okay. So Engel curve will be vertical to the x-axis. So this is the Engel curve for a neutral good. So positively sloped Engel curve for the normal good, negatively sloped or backward bending Engel curve will be denoting the inferior goods, or when the given goods case also it is negatively sloped, and when it comes to the neutral goods whose consumption does not change with increased income, such cases we are having an Engel curve which is vertical to the x-axis. For example, the quantity of the common salt purchased by a family remains the same. Okay, see, take the example of salt. If the income of the person is becoming 300 to 400 and 400 to 500, whatever the income, the consumption of the salt will be same for the family or an individual. In such goods, so such kinds of goods are basically the neutral commodities, and those goods, the shape of the Engel curve will be vertical to the x-axis. So now let us see another model question. The Engel curve relates consumption of a good to A, income, B, demand, C, price, and D, market demand, taste and preferences. So we have seen the Engel's law. It is basically related to the income and the consumption of the good. So Engel curve is relating the consumption of the good to the income. When income of a person increases, consumption increases for a normal good. When income of a person increases, the consumptions or the income spent or the proportion of the income allocated to the food items decreases, and when the income of the person rise, it remains unaffected for the commodities like the clothing, fuel, housing, etc. So this is what the Engel curve is been explaining, or the conclusion that we can draw from the Engel curve. So Engel curve is basically related to the income and the consumption of the good. So the answer will be A. Next question. According to Ernest Engel, as income increases, we are given with 3 options and we have to find the best answer. So first option, the proportion of budget spent on food will fall. Second option, the proportion of budget spent on housing and clothing will remain constant. Option 3, the proportion of budget spent on all other goods will increase. So we have this, we are given with the 3 points, and we have to find which all these points are related to the Engel's curve, according to how the income is been related to the consumption of these goods as per Ernest Engel. So here only 1 is true, 1 and 2 is true, 1 and 3 is true, and last option 1, 2 and 3 are true. So here the correct answer is 1, 2 and 3 are true, because when we learn the conclusions that can be drawn from the Engel's curve, we have learned that when the income is increasing, the percentage expenditure on the necessaries like food will be decreasing. Otherwise, and same time when the income is decreasing, the percentage spent on the item necessaries of life like food will be increasing. So other point was the percentage expenditure on the luxuries, okay, and the cultural, recreational ones, education, health, etc. increases with increase in income and decreases when income decreases. These are generally like the normal goods. So when it comes to the education, health, cultural facilities or recreational facilities, all these things, the consumption of these will increase with increased income. So that is another conclusion that we drew from the Engel's law. And another one is when it comes to the lodging, rent, fuel and light, clothing, all these things, expenditure generally same for all income. Whatever the income rise, the level of consumption does not change, the level of expenditure does not change. So these are the conclusions we drawn from the Engel's curve. And come back to the question. So this, when we see all these 3 statements are the conclusions that we drew from the Engel curve. The proportion of the budget spent on food is falling with increased income. The proportion of budget spent on housing and clothing will be remaining same. We know that other than the housing and clothing, we have seen The other aspects like rent, fuel and light, all these things also will remain same, and the proportion of the budget spent on all other goods will increase. So here when we comes to the all other goods, so the goods will be like luxury goods. Okay, so luxury goods like the education, health, the recreational facilities, all those things are the other goods which will be whose consumption will be increasing with increased income. So in this question the answer will be 1, 2 and 3 will be correct. D will be the answer. Next question, this is a previous year question which is asked in 2014 June paper 3. Engel curve denotes. So basically this is a kind of question which is we are asking what is Engel curve or what is being denoted through the Engel curve. And let us see the options. First option, a various combination of good which a consumer would be willing to purchase at various price level. Second option, various amount of good which a consumer would be willing to purchase at various income level. And option C, the various amount of good purchased when the price of its substitutes tend to rise. And option D, the relationship between income effect and substitution effect. So here we know that when the Engel curve is explaining how the income is being allotted for the consumption of certain goods. So how the increased income will change the consumption of certain goods. So when it comes to the normal goods, we know that Engel curve is upward sloping. That means it is denoting increased income leads to increased consumption of the goods. When it comes to the given and inferior goods, we know that the Engel curve is negatively sloped. That means increased income is leading to reduced consumption of the goods. And when we take the neutral commodities, we know that Engel curve is vertical to the x-axis, which means that increased income is not at all changing the consumption of the good. So basically Engel curve is basically denoting the relationship between the income and the consumption of the good. Okay, so it is basically the amount of good which a consumer would be willing to purchase at various income level will be the answer. So answer will be B. Next question, 2012 June paper 2, and this is the last question. For an inferior good, income consumption curves and Engel curves are. Options, positively sloped, negatively sloped are the same, and the income consumption curve positively sloped and Engel curve is negatively sloped. So this is a question based on the inferior goods, and here they are asking what is the slope of the inferior good when the income consumption curve and Engel curves are considered. Okay, so we know that for the inferior good the income consumption curve is negative, because with an increased income the consumption of the good will fall for an inferior good. When an inferior good is considered, when income of a person is increasing, the consumption of that inferior good will fall. So because of that reason, we can say the income consumption curve is negative for the inferior good, and there is a negative income effect. Whereas moving on to the Engel curves of the inferior good, we know that the Engel curve of the inferior good is negatively sloped or having a backward bending curve. So when we take this figure, see here we have the normal good and the inferior good. The income increases, the consumption of the good is increasing for a normal good. But at a point when the income further increases, the quantity demand of the good is decreasing, and that is the point where the good is inferior in nature. Okay, and at this point, at this level of income, consumer is in a position to get better of goods than the initially used good, or better quality good is available as a substitute for the consumer. At that time what the consumer decides to choose is stop the consumption of the currently using good, and they will start using the consumption of another good which is a better quality than the initial good that was using. So with the increased income, when the consumption of a already used good is falling, that means that good is inferior good. Okay, so for the inferior good the Engel curve will be negatively sloped, whereas for the when the income consumption is considered for the inferior good, the income consumption curve will be negative, because in the increased income there will be decrease in the quantity demanded for the good X. Okay, so the answer will be here B, negatively sloped. For an inferior good, income consumption curve is negatively sloped and Engel curve is also negatively sloped. The answer is B. Okay, so this is all about the Engel curve and the previous equations. So through this series of video we have seen about the given goods, its previous equations, inferior goods, its previous equations, and last we have discussed Engel curve along with the previous equations. So this is all about the type of goods series of video.